Hello everyone. In this video, I will showcase the basics of camera control and camera properties within After Effects. We will also introduce some concepts about 3D layers and a couple of effects. So let's get started. Our goal is to try to recreate this short and simple title sequence. So 2D layers and 2D compositions are great in After Effects, but if you really want to take your game to the next level, you need to introduce the concept of 3D environments. And that is, how do we control layers in 3D space? So to do so, I thought I'd put together this short video to showcase how I created that and how fairly simple it is to manipulate layers. The main thing when you're working in 3D worlds is to do a lot of pre-planning. And that means make sure that you have an understanding of what space you have to work with so that when you start placing items within that 3D space, you can move or control your cameras properly within that space that you have created. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and bring in a composition. I'm going to import an Illustrator file that I created called Halloween Illustration. And this is a layered file. Sorry, I should have imported it as composition. And retain layer sizes. And so with this composition, what I want to do basically is going to look like it's in black. And that's because all the layers are in black. But if I change my color background on my composition, you'll notice that I have layers in there. And these layers basically are all the files, all the layers that I created in Illustrator. Now what I want is I want to have a backdrop that creates that gives me that sensation of sunset time. And for that, I'm going to create a solid. For that, I'm going to press the keys Control Y on the keyboard, or I can go Layer, New, Solid. And then I'll create a solid, the size of the composition. And to that, I am going to add a gradient ramp effect. Now, this gradient ramp, what it does is it creates a gradient just like it would in Photoshop or Illustrator. And so with that selected, I'm going to change the swatch colors to on the black to a dark brown, and that is sort of the top color. And for the white, I am going to choose a burnt orange. This will give me that dusk feel. And I'm just going to move that layer to the back of the stack and it will remain there. I'm not going to make that a layer 3D layer, sorry, because this layer will be, it doesn't matter where my camera is, it's always going to look the same. So I'm not going to change that. At this point, I am going to bring in the moon that you saw in the video a second ago. And I am going to drop it right on top of that background layer. Now with that moon selected, I'm going to scale it down to about 50%. And I'm going to change my tool to the shape tool. And I'm going to select ellipse. And then I'm going to double click to create a circular mask. Then I'm going to double click on one of the handles in the mask. And that allows me to modify the mask. Now, if I start resizing the mask, it will resize randomly. If I want to constrain proportions, as I am dragging, I will press Shift. And you'll notice that it constrains proportions. And then I'll press Control so that I can increase or decrease the size of the mask from the center out. And that covers pretty much my entire moon. So with that done, I will change the mode on that moon from normal to add. And then I will move that moon to the side. Let me select the layer and move it to the side, and that will do. Now, the key when you're working with 3D layers is to pre-plan, and that's what I said earlier, to have really good pre-production. What that means is get a lay of the land. When you turn a layer into 3D, into a 3D layer, what happens is you are increasing one extra dimension into the layer. So as you see things in the real world, when you're looking at your left and right or up or down, think of those two axes as up and down meaning the y-axis, and left and right or horizontal to be your x-axis. Now, what happens when something moves towards the camera or towards you or away from you? that would be your z-axis. So you have width, height, and depth. That is what working in 3D means. Any layer that you turn into a 3D layer in After Effects will basically change all of the settings for the properties into 3D settings. What that means is each of the settings will include now a z-axis. So for example, let's select the title layer and press the P to call its position settings. Now you'll notice that by default I have an X and a Y value for the flat 2D layer. As soon as I click on this switch here, and that is, by the way, how you turn a layer into a 3D layer, it will automatically create a whole new set of properties that respond to that 3D environment, including that the position no longer has X and Y, but it also has a Z value, as you can see here. It has X 640, Y 360, and Z a value of 0. And that is because since it doesn't know where it is on the Z axis, it places it at a value of 0, which is the origin of your composition in 3D. So now you have an extra dimension to create depth, and with that, a way of positioning or scaling or rotating items in that Z axis. So with this in mind, what I want to do is I want to turn all of the layers into 3D layers, and then I want to place them, stack them or stagger them into 3D space in order to be able to create that sensation of depth. Let me bring back the video once again, and let's take a look at it again to refresh. So as you can see, I am moving a camera or trucking a camera. Trucking means pushing the camera forward or backward. Trucking. Tracking means moving the camera left or right on the x-axis, or up or down on the y-axis. Now, tilting the camera up or down, that means tilting up or down means you're not moving the camera, you're simply rotating the camera. Panning the camera left or right means you're not moving the camera, you're simply rotating the camera left or right. So when you move the camera left or right, that's called tracking, or when you move it up or down. When you're pushing the camera in or pulling the camera out, that's called trucking. Now, so what we want to do is we want to truck into this composition. And as you can see, all the layers, the reason why you know you're moving through 3D space is because some layers are in and out of focus as you move your camera, sorry. So let's go back to the composition, and what I want to do is now stagger these layers in 3D space so that I can plan out my spacing and I can figure out where things go. Now, with this in mind, what I want to do is, since these two layers, the full moon and the background layer, do not, I'm not going to do anything with them. They do not change. They're going to remain the same. I want to save myself some real estate, so I want to make them shy by clicking on this little guy with the nose sticking over the wall, and then turning on the shy layer, hide shy layer switch. What that does is it removes them from my stack, but they're still visible in my composition. So I have a little bit more real estate to work with. So now with this in mind, and with the layers turning to 3D, what I want to do is I want to create a camera. First thing I want to do is go Layer, New, Camera. You can also use the shortcut. Now, there are two types of camera that come default with After Effects. One node camera equals a handheld camera. So it's a camera that you have in your hand and you move it around. What that means is the camera becomes its own pivot. So you can pivot around the camera whichever way you want because you have control from the camera itself. A two-node camera comes with what we call a point of interest. That is a point in space where the camera will always be pointing. So it's basically a point that the lens will always follow that point of interest. Your camera will rotate around that point of interest. So one node camera, handheld camera, free flow or free rotation, free move. Two node camera, the rotation or the pivot point is that point of interest. So the camera will rotate around that point of interest. So with that in mind, I want to choose a one node camera for this particular composition. I want to make it a 35mm because 35mm is a default lens. It's a common standard lens. And I want to make sure that I do not enable depth of field just yet. So with this in mind, I'll click OK. and you'll notice that not much changes on the scene except that I now have a camera. Let me move that camera to the top of the stack so that I can work with it easily. It doesn't matter where the camera is, it will always see the same thing. By the way, since all the layers are now 3D, the stacking order in the composition is not as important as it was before. What that means is now, thanks, even though the title now appears on top of the haunted house, if I open up its position value and I increase the value on the Z-axis by clicking and dragging on the Z-axis, you'll notice that it's now behind that haunted house. And that is because now it's obeying the position on the Z-axis. So it's looking at how far away from the camera or how close to the camera things are. Let me undo that really quick. And so now the position on the stack is not as important when it comes to the 3D positioning of the layers. It doesn't matter if I can move the background in front of the title if I need to by simply changing its Z-axis. Now this is important within the Z environment, meaning in the 3D environment. There are items that I can place in between that are 2D, which will break the order of things right now, but we will talk about those during class time. Now, with this in mind, what I want to do is I want to place my layers in the specific staggered order so that I can actually recreate the scene that you're looking at, which is currently flat. Everything now appears to be on the 0 point on the Z-axis. If I open up the position values for all of them, you'll notice that Z-axis for all of them is 0. So I want to go ahead and start staggering them in space. So let me go ahead and select the BG, the background first, and I'll send that to about, say, 3,500 pixels. And you'll notice that it gets small. And the reason for that is because it's far away from the camera. But because it is far away from the camera, I can go ahead and go back up and scale it up. Scale it up to cover the entire composition. And what that does for me basically is that as long as I am far away from that item in the composition, it doesn't matter how far away I am from it, the staggering, because it's far away from the camera, is gonna still look sharp. It's still gonna look good. So as long as I keep it away from the camera, everything is going to be okay. This works well with parallax. And remember, I mentioned parallax is that effect that you create by making the things move that are closer to the camera move faster than those that are far away from the camera. If you want to fake this, and you actually can enhance your 3D environment by making use or having an understanding of that things that you can push away in the distance, as long as your camera doesn't get close to them, they'll still look sharp even though you decreased its size, the size of the layer, and then by pushing it away from the camera and then scale it up to match the original size, it still will look good. So let me go ahead and move this down on the composition, so that is at the bottom of the layers, and so you see that things are starting to look pretty much the same as they did before. It is interesting to see this interaction between the moon and the background. I think it's something to do with my graphics card, because I hadn't seen that before. So let's go ahead and keep it as is for now, and I'll just keep on staggering. So now let me work on the haunted house. Let me change its position to about 2,500 pixels. That pushes that back, and let me scale it up again so that it covers the entirety of the composition, and let me move that down to match the bottom of the composition. There you are. And then all these streets will go, tree 1 will go at 500 on the Z-axis. So 500 on the Z-axis. Tree 2 will be at about 1,000 on the Z-axis. And tree 3 will be at 1,500 on the Z-axis. Now you'll notice that the trees seem to be floating. I need to bring them back down. You'll notice that when I select the 3D layer, doesn't matter what 3D layer I'm selecting, it automatically shows what I call a gizmo. And that gizmo is these 3 arrows. The 3 arrows are constrainers so that you can move things in 3D space. That is, the green arrow is the Y-axis constraint, the red arrow is the X-axis constraint, and the blue arrow right here is the Z-axis constraint. What that means is if I click and drag at this point, it will only move on that axis. It will constrain the motion to that axis, which is extremely helpful when moving in 3D space. So if I move this down on the y-axis, so that is on the background again, slightly above the background, let's say, and then I'll go to 3.2, move that slightly down, so that is already on the background, and then there is 3.3, move that on the background. Now I picked and I didn't constrain. There you are. Now for that one, I'm going to move that slightly towards the center. And then my title is going to be at around 2000. You'll see how small that got. Now I want to check to see what's going on with this moon, and I wonder if I placed the moon at the top of everything. I probably did. So let's see, add value to that. Normal, and let me move that behind everything else. So that's not, oh, that's a 3D layer, that's why. So I just turned it off. I just turned off the 3D value of it, and let me hide them again. Boom. So now it's behind everything else. Let me change its value to add. Oh, screen is what we had to use, right? Or add, either or is going to work. All right, add gives me a little bit more pop, so I'll use add. All right, so now the goal is to, let me select everything and collapse all the layers so that I see everything closed. And what I want to do is I want to bring in that camera. I want to create a camera that I can push through everything else. That's the camera that I had created before. And since everything is in sync now, what I want to do is I want to move that camera through space. So just like with any other layer, cameras have, properties. Do you find those properties under transform? They have basically the same properties or similar properties to what any other layer would have, including position. So if I select the camera and I say position, then I have the ability to create keyframes to move through space on the z-axis. Watch. So that is the goal, to actually create that motion. Now by default, when you create a camera, it will default to this value on the z-axis, which is negative 1244.4. This is where that pre-production comes in handy. You want to make sure that you do the changes by the numbers. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that any change, any value that you change within your composition is intentional. Do not leave things to the composition to decide for you when it comes to controlling the values of the keyframes. What that means is plan out. That's what that means. And that is the reason why every layer that I created was at 500, 1000. It was like almost on every 500 pixels. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do it this way. What it means is make sure that you record the values, that you know what those positions or rotations are, so that you can easily control the camera within the composition. This is specifically important when you start working with depth of field, when you enable the depth of field on the camera. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. If I double click on the camera, I call the camera options, again, the camera settings. Now you can do it that way, or you can select the camera, go to layer, camera settings, opens up the exact same window, or if you uncollapse the camera under the transform options, there's camera options. So if you open that up, it will give you the same options that you saw on that camera settings window that we saw a second ago. Now with this selected, what I want to do, first thing I want to do is I want to turn on the depth of field. I'll explain what each one of these things is during class, or I have explained, because by the time you see this video, you've already been to the class. So I am going to turn on the depth of field so that you'll see that things basically can be made blurry. And that refers to the ability that you have to create a shallow depth of field. Cameras in After Effects are exactly like DSLR cameras or any camera in the real world where you can control the depth of field through a lens. The way that you control depth of field is by focusing on what we call focus distance. Focus distance is the distance at which any element away from your lens will be in complete focus. And combined with the aperture, that means the amount of iris opening that you have in your camera, which will allow you to create that shallow depth of field. So what that means is keep in mind where your camera is at all times, pixel-wise. and the amount of aperture that you have in your lens. The higher the aperture, the more you are asking your camera to create a shallow depth of field. Right now, my aperture is 17 pixels, but if I go to, say, for example, 100 pixels, watch what happens in the composition. Certain things start getting blurry. And that is because it's saying, okay, now I am trying to create that shallow depth of field. My camera is at 1244 pixels, and the focus distance is 1244, which means according to the position of my camera, the position of my camera was negative 1244. That means anything that is at 0 pixels will be in full focus. My first tree, this one here, is at 500. So if I change the position of my camera to get 500 pixels closer to that, this tree will be in full focus. And what that means is, take a look. If I go to, let's say I change let's actually do this by the numbers. I'm going to go back to camera options, and I am going to change, I'm going to change my focus distance to be an exact number. I am going to make it 1,000. Okay? So with that in mind, for this first tree to be exactly on focus, my camera needs to be 1,000 pixels away from that tree, which means my camera needs to be, right now, it's at negative 1244 on the z-axis, but if I enter negative 500, that puts it at 1,000 pixels away from that tree. So if I hit return, that tree should come in full focus. And it does. As you can see, my tree is in complete focus. So now it is a game of numbers. Now I need to start looking at, okay, do I change my focus distance? Do I change my aperture? The most important thing is that anything that you have that you want to be in full focus needs to be at the focus distance of the camera. So let's change that to 1500. That means that whatever is at 1,000 pixels, which is this tree, will come in focus. Boom, there it is. Now this is in focus. So with that in mind, I can now move my camera through space, keeping in mind the focus distance, knowing what should be or will be on focus. And that is just basically subtracting or adding pixels to the position of my camera. So right now my focus distance on my camera is 1500 pixels. So what I want to do is I want to move my camera back. Position. Let me call the position value for it, and I'm going to make it negative 1500, and that's going to bring it too far back. So let's make it negative 1000. Negative 1000. So now basically negative 1000, and anything that is 1500 pixels away, because that is my focal distance. Focus distance is 1500 pixels. So 1500 pixels, and I am at negative 1000. So that means negative 1000, 1500, that's 0, 500. So this guy is on focus. So to start with, this guy will be on focus. This tree right here will be on focus. So let me set a position keyframe. Now my goal is to have my title to be on focus when I get to it. And I want to get to it at around 4 seconds. That means my camera is going to move from 0 to 4 seconds. And what was the value of that Halloween thing? The title? 2000. So I need to be at 500 pixels at this point, because the distance between 500 and 2000 is 1500, and that is my focal distance. So if I move my camera to positive 500, my title should be right on focus. Now at this point, I can now control the aperture and increase or decrease the value of my aperture to control the amount of blurriness that you see in the camera. So let me actually easy this out. Shift F9, Shift F9, and well, that's not working. So let me go ahead and create frame assistant, Shift F9, there it is. And that will slow my camera, and as it goes, things come in and out of focus. Now, if I want to increase my shallow depth of field a little bit more, then all I need to do is open up that aperture somewhat, and there it is. Now things are a little bit more pronounced as I walk through the composition. With this in mind, then now I can go ahead and select different layers. Let me collapse all the layers so I can see them all. And I can go ahead and move things around in the composition to bring things back into view in the camera to create a little bit more of an interesting composition. Perhaps I want to move this tree a little bit further to the left on the x-axis, so that as I walk through it, things come in and out of focus, enhancing that effect. Okay, so the combination is between keeping an eye on that focus distance and the aperture to increase or decrease the effect. Now, the moon and the background do not get blurry at all because they're always on focus because they're 2D layers. But if I wanted to blur that moon, I can apply a fast blur to it. So if I go to my filter for the effects and type fast, I get fast box blur. I can use that on the moon, and just giving it a value of 5 would be more than sufficient. So now, and I'm never going to get close to the moon, so it will never come in focus. By the time this is at 4, this comes in full view and is on focus. So that is how you control the camera. It's a combination, like I said, of your focus distance, the position of the camera, and the value of the aperture to actually create that sensation of depth of field. Now, to reveal this, we will do it in the next video with a couple of filters.